Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday and Friday. I'm going to record 2 videos right now. Okay, so I wanted to I'm going to talk through something. I know it's going to be kind of a review for you, but I still think it's important to think about, especially when we are faced with like the overwhelming world of the internet and all of the information that's out there. So I just want to encourage you guys to be thoughtful and kind of show you how I would go about finding research if I was assigned to do so. So I'm going to share my screen, and I have filled out the organizer, pretending that I am you. So I'm assuming I'm a student, and I was assigned to ask questions about certain aspects of the Civil War. And I decided to ask questions about the generals, as you can see here. Who were some of the most famous generals or soldiers of the war is one of my questions. What happened to them after the war? Untold stories, that's the area I'm most interested in. I have the most questions for that. And just in general have the most questions for that. So if I were doing this research project, that would be the thing I would be most excited to research and find out about. Sort of the voices that aren't part of history that don't get heard as often. So my questions that I have there are: what was life like for women during the Civil War? What was life like for slaves on plantations during the Civil War? And did children still go to school during the Civil War? So it was life like for children. So focusing in either on one of those, depending on what kind of research I found, or looking at all 3 of those groups during the war. And then I also was interested in slaves as soldiers. How many slaves fought as soldiers for the North and for the South? Were slaves in the South forced to fight for their masters? Were slaves in the North treated well? So those are my 3 areas of questions. So now we're going to go to the Google, known as the Google, and I'm going to look for. I'm going to start with women's role, women during the Civil War. So I'm just going to start with that, women during Civil War, and so. The first thing that pops up, and I had a suspicion, I had a feeling this was the case because women have dressed as soldiers and fought in most wars in history. There are stories of women fighting in wars, so I'm not surprised to find this. That's just sort of something I have as my background knowledge. So there are women who have fought, who dressed up and fought as men in the Confederate Army. So women from the South. In the Civil War. So that's something I had a feeling about, which would definitely be something that's interesting to research. It's history.com. That's a good place to get information. I'm not going to click on it yet, but I will probably come back to it. But it's always a good idea to keep scrolling, see what else you can find. So I'm going down. I'm just skimming those first couple sentences of information, and I'm looking at what kind of source it is. I do not know what DPLA is. I'm not sure what that is, but it does say primary source sets. Probably it's a reliable source. I'm just going to guess. Usually things that have primary sources, they're not trying to rip you off. They're not businesses. They're pretty reliable. But I don't know what DPLA is, so I'm going to keep going. Ducksters. I have heard of Ducksters. That is a kind of like a Wikipedia, but more for kids. You guys have probably used it before. It's pretty reliable. It's not going to give a ton of detailed and nuanced information. You're thinking more like entry information, probably more at like a 4th, 5th grade reading level. Not bad, not a bad source, but maybe not the direction we want to go in right now. I see battlefields.org, lots of battlefields.org. Archives.gov, that's actually anything.gov, that's from the government. So that's definitely going to be reliable, and it's going to have a lot of interesting things in it. Here we start to move into encyclopediavirginia.org. I don't know what that is. Historynet.com, not really sure what that is. I see a .edu down there. So if I was going to, if you're left with like this list of sources and these things start popping up like HistoryNet, Encyclopedia Virginia, that's not necessarily a bad source. It's just something we're not familiar with, and you're going to find those kinds of sources in there. They wouldn't be my first choice. If you haven't heard of it, if it's got I mean, Encyclopedia Virginia could really just be a group of people in Virginia who are amateur historians who've put together a website about Virginia. That's not a bad thing. And I'm sure they have good information, but they're not like incredibly well known. The way history.com is going to be really well known, the way a .edu is going to be really well known, and the way a .gov is going to be really well known. So if I was going to rate these and pick which ones I'm going to spend my time with, I'm not going to go to those. Usually the first couple hits are going to be pretty good hits. You're going to have history.com, you're going to have .govs, you're going to have .edus. They're going to be strong choices for you. Battlefield.org could be a really great source. I just don't know. I've never heard of it. So usually you're going to be able to find stuff on this first page. Obviously, you can go to your second and your third page of your source. Oh, I'm glad I did. SmithsonianMag.com. Smithsonian's a really, that's a really venerable institution. Here's another .edu. Then we get into like infoplease.com. Not so much. Not going to be a good one. Grace, stop. My daughter was eating donut crumbs off her pajamas.
What? It tastes delicious.
We have a Britannica here. Britannica is going to be a good source. We have this other Georgia encyclopedia. I'm not sure what these Georgia, Virginia encyclopedias are. I'll have to look into it more to see that. Womenshistory.org, that's going to have interesting information. So then we're getting into like a newspaper article, maybe, but probably not going to help us. Recollections.biz, no. So this is the second page. I wouldn't go much further than the second or third page as you begin your research, but we did find some good stuff on that second page. So then you have to kind of decide on what the next step is. So your first step is, and I can put this in the assignment, so we have that. First step is like, is it reputable? Have I heard of it? Is it going to have good information? Things that have .orgs, things that have .govs, things that have .edus, all of those are going to be reputable, or just things you've heard of, history.com. The next thing is, can you read it? And believe it or not, the reason I don't like not Encyclopedia Britannica, Wikipedia, is because I think it's really hard to read. It is not my first stop when I'm trying to find things out. No Wikipedia entry came up for this, but I don't like it. I just don't think it provides, I think they're hard to read. They can be super scientific. They're written usually, sometimes they're written by some rando and they're not reliable, but most of the time they're written by people who are super into their field. They're experts on their field. They have like PhDs, and it's not user friendly. So I personally don't encourage kids to use Wikipedia, not because it's unreliable, but because I think it's really hard to read. I think things like history.com are going to be easier to read. I know Ducksters is a really good entry point to understand the topic. So those are going to be more what I'm going to go to first. So after you pick a reputable source, then you want to move into finding things you can read. So I'm going to click on this history.com. I'm looking right now for readability. I know this is going to be reliable. It's history.com. Not completely sure of all the questions I have yet about my topic, but I just want to make sure I can understand it. So I'm just going to read the first paragraph to myself. In many ways, the coming of the Civil War challenged the ideology of Victorian domesticity, kind of hard words in there, that had defined the lives of men and women in the antebellum era. In the North and in the South, the war forced women into public life in ways they could scarcely have imagined a generation before. So the first sentence is not very readable. Ideology, domesticity, antebellum era. I don't know what any of those words mean. I actually do as your teacher, but as a seventh grader, I don't, just so you know. But the second sentence I really like. That one makes sense to me. It's pretty clear. So I'm going to keep going and continue to skim. In the years before the Civil War, the lives of American women were shaped by a set of ideals that historians called the cult of true womanhood. As the men's work moved away from the home and into shops, offices, and factories, the household became a new kind of place, a private, feminized, domestic sphere, a haven in a heartless world. Ooh, I like that. True women devoted their lives to creating a clean, comfortable, nurturing home for their husbands and children. Okay. So far, I'm pretty close. I think this is something that I'm going to really be able, I think I'm going to be able to get some stuff from this. I feel like it's pretty clear and straightforward and seems to have some decent information. Sorry. So I'm going to go with this source. In general, for you guys, I would say history.com is pretty readable. I've given you guys history.com articles before, so I'm a fan of history.com. So I'm going to copy and paste this link, and I'm going to put it underneath here in sources, and I have my first source. I've barely read it, right? All I've done is I've established that it's a reasonable source, that is reputable, and then I can read it. That's really where we are right now. And we're so it may be that you have 4 or 5 sources that you find, but then you're going to have them linked into this document. And you won't have to go back and do a ton more research. So I like that one. I remember Miss Ryan saying that Duxters is good for entry-level information. So I'm actually going to go to Duxters and see what it has to say. It's an education site. See that it's very clearly, it's got nurses, spies, women as soldiers. It has a list of influential women, interesting facts. I really like this source. It's going to be what's going to lead me on to other pathways. Women as spies. That's something I think is super interesting. I'd love to find some more research on that. So I'm going to start with this Duxters to go on to get the rest of the information. And then finally, I'm going to look at, oops, nope, not that. I'm going to go back. Which other one was I interested in? I'm going to go to one of the .edu. Take a look at that. Women and the Civil War. University of Maryland, I think this is. Yep, University of Nursing the War's Wounded. When I realized what I have stood against. I see a Harper's Weekly picture. Okay, I'm actually not going to go with this. It's too hard. I think it's got a lot of good information, but it really seems like it's too challenging. It's got this letter here, but it's like written in old-timey speak. I do see some stuff about Clara Barton, so if I start to maybe research specific women, I might get into it, but it's a lot of quotes. I don't know. Let me see. I've scanned. See, this is really what's going on in my brain, guys. So you really get to see how this process goes. I do see more information about spies here. I'm going to keep it in my mind, but I'm not going to put it down. I think it's too hard. There's a lot of big words. It's very academically written, which is a problem with .edus. So I'm going to kind of put it to the side for now. I'm not going to go with that one at this moment. But what I do know is I'm super interested in the spy situation now. So I see, here's a .gov, Confederate woman spies, Rebel Rose Greenhow of Washington, D.C., and Belle Boyd of Virginia. I'm so intrigued by spies. I want to be one, and I would be a terrible spy. National Park Services.gov. Okay, this looks super interesting. All right, I'm going to copy this link because I'm into it and I want to learn more about it. So I'm going to put that in there, and then I'm going to add a question. Oops. Because I now have questions on women as spies. So who were some famous female spies during the Civil War? All right, I'm gonna get off. Well, actually, no, I'm not going to. I'm gonna stay on this page. Okay, so guys, I want to point something really important out to you. I started with questions. 2 of my questions in this category were, what was life like for slaves on plantations during the Civil War? And did children still go to school during the Civil War? I've done no research on slaves or children. My brain has gone in a new direction. Spies. I want to learn more about spies. I'm super interested in spies. So now I'm thinking about spies in the Civil War. This is what research does. You start off with some questions and you can go off. And I am telling you, go off on the paths, go off on the tangents, find the things you're interested in. Now I'm interested in female spies during the Civil War. I want to learn more about them. Maybe that's all I end up researching. Maybe I start to research it. I don't find a ton about it. I'm still really interested in plantation life during the Civil War. So I go back and find more research on that. But the thing with research is that your curiosity should take you in a certain direction. And that's really what I want you to go. So I really want you to use this time of gathering sources as also being a time of getting interested in things. And if you're looking into generals, leads you into like battlefields, which leads you into cannons, and you spend a ton of time reading about Civil War cannons, do some research on Civil War cannons. That's awesome. That can be what your project's about. So I really want you to see how you can, like, there we go, how you can kind of take this. That's where I want you to go. So today is gathering sources. That's all you're doing. You really barely have to read them. I didn't do much reading just then. I just gathered them. So first, is it reliable? Can I trust it? Have I heard of it before? Second, can I read it? Is it accessible to me as a reader? And if the answer to that question is no, then you don't put it down, because there's no point finding a source that you can't read. All right, I'm going to stop, and I will talk to you soon.